views expressed on this program are those of the hosts, guests, and callers, and are not necessarily those of this station, its management, or other advertisers. You're listening to Transformation Talk Radio.
Get ready for a game changer. Sarah Westall is bringing you Business Game Changers Radio. Mondays at noon Pacific, 3 Eastern, Sarah will bring you leading experts, visionaries, and newsmakers who provide the best commentary on big issues and cutting-edge innovations. Sarah's 20 years as a business executive will help you think like an entrepreneur with expertise, energy, and attitude. Now here's your host, Sarah Westall.
Welcome to Business Game Changers. I'm Sarah Westall, and you're listening to Conscious Business Radio on the Transformation Talk Radio Network. Well, I hope everyone is having a great day today. It is a great time to be alive. Let's face it, as far as history goes, we are in an amazing time in history. We have advanced technology everywhere, medical advancements we'd only dreamed of 100 years ago, and potential beyond our dreams. But at the same time, we also have a lot of instability. It's kind of ironic that we're in the best time of history, but also the most scary time of history. Economic debt, social unrest, terrorist activity, and outright criminal activity at the highest levels of government and society. You know, we take down criminals at the lowest level, but we need to look at criminals at all levels. Criminals need to get out of our society in general so that we can thrive and function great. But today we're going to talk about economic issues and the debt that we have worldwide, and not just debt, but the issues with fiat currencies and what's going on with the central banks and so forth. And so we have expert coming on. His name is Andy Hoffman, and he is the media director and financial expert for Miles Franklin. And we've had past guests on this, Andy Schekman, who is the CEO of Miles Franklin. He's come on in the past. I have been told Andy Hoffman is the brightest guy at Miles Franklin, at least according to Andy Schekman. He thinks that he's just a brilliant, and he is. And this interview is very eye-opening. We discuss global economic situation. We talk about Brexit, the EU, and of course the United States. But he brings to light many facets of the global economic situation that you may not be aware of. And also, what are the different central banks doing, and what are the policies going on, and how is that affecting the world? But this is a pretty explosive interview. You know, I attack everything wanting to figure out how to fix this situation. What can we do to make things better? Right? I mean, what can our world leaders do? Of course, they need courage and they need the smarts to do it, because to do what's necessary is hard. It takes courage and it takes bravery. I mean, you have to get out there and get it done when everybody's going to be pointing fingers at you that you're the reason it failed, when actually you're making the steps to make it prosperous long term. So we need to see if we have a politician that's ready to go there, ready to do what's necessary to get this stuff done. And I think it's important that they listen to people like Andy Hoffman to figure out what really is going on. Talk to the inner people at the central banks, but talk to people who are going to tell you the truth, not somebody that has a different agenda, someone who's trying to maintain their billions at the expense of others. We have to do things that are smart and have the courage to listen to the people that know. So I'm hoping this will be a little bit of an eye-opening on what's going on. And now we're going to welcome Andy Hoffman to the program. Hello, Andy. Welcome to the program.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, I heard you're the smartest man at Miles Franklin, so let's see.
Well, there's only about 10 of us, but that's a great honor because there's some smart people where I work.
Well, it's always fun to work around smart people. It gives you that energy. So, okay, Are we in a recession currently, or what's going on?
Well, we've been in a recession. I mean, if real accounting were used since, 2001, 2002, because, of course, the way theoretically a recession is measured is by whether GDP is negative or not, and GDP is measured by the nominal rate of output, which is goosed by all kinds of other things that shouldn't be in there in the first place, minus the rate of inflation as measured by the government, which is so massively understated it's laughable.
So basically they just keep manipulating numbers, but the more you manipulate, the more off it gets, and at some point it's just going to be really difficult to make up for that.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a matter of confidence, because the whole point is trying to create the veneer that something that doesn't exist is the case. And, a big part of that is manipulating stock markets as well. And, of course, the QE and all kinds of Federal Reserve machinations to lower interest rates to try to make it look like a lot of the activity going on is organic. And, and also suppressing the precious metal price so that it doesn't look like the inflation that they're hiding is actually there. But the fact is, as you said, the longer and longer this charade moves on, as you see all the real data behind the fake GDP data and inflation data, such as the highest level of entitlements that we've had probably in the history of the country, the highest level of debt, the lowest level of home ownership, the lowest consumer confidence. I mean, you name it across the board. Labor participation is back in the 1970s. Real income or real household income is back in the late 1970s, early 1980s.
And that's when women stayed at home, and now everybody's wanting to find jobs because they need it to pay their mortgages and to pay their bills. And
that's right.
Yeah, I mean, back in the 70s, you could have just dad, what did your dad do for a living? You could just have dad working, and we could make it. But now we can't.
Isn't it fun? Because we talk about the labor participation rate, and that's a good point you bring up, is for the country is back to late 1970s levels. But as you said, back then women weren't working. So if you look at the labor participation rate for men, it's at an all-time low level for the history of the country. And why is it that women had to start working in the late 1970s? Well, guess what? We went off the gold standard in 1971. Inflation exploded. Real wages went down. And therefore, people needed to start working. It's the exact same thing as that happened in my household. My father worked in a library and fed his family, and we had a pretty good middle-class life until that happened. And then my mom had to go back to school to learn to be a computer programmer in the early 1980s. And after that, all it was twice the incomes, but no change in the standard of living. And here we are 30, 40 years later, and the standard of living is much lower than it was back then. And people are working much harder for jobs that are, that pay much less than they used to.
Yeah. I'm like, it's a very sobering thought. I tend to be a feminist in a lot of ways. Women should have the opportunity to work, especially if you're in a bad situation. And what are you going to do? You got kids and you got to support them like everybody else. But at the same time, you're like, oh gosh, I really wish I didn't have to,
Well,
I wish I could just take care of my kids. So it's the option, and having the good, be
right.
able to support your family on a reasonable amount of work.
I mean, let's face it, no one wants to work. I mean, yes, there's this thing out there that's this kind of myth about people, they just love to get up and work. But no, what people love to do is have leisure. I mean, that's what you like. You work so that you can have leisure. And the problem is that now, because you're forced to work more, you have less leisure, which is not a good thing, particularly when one of the quote leisure activities is raising children. When you have at least one parent home as opposed to none, you're going to do a better job raising your children. And you're going to enjoy your life more. And that's part of the American dream that's just been erased away, partly by secular changes. Let's face it, the world's population has grown. A lot of the industry has gone to other parts of the world, partly because American trade deals sent it there.
Well, yeah, but, with the worldwide economy, things are shifting, and things are going to balance out worldwide. So it's not all just because our leaders are not doing things right. It was going to naturally change based on having a worldwide, trade going on.
Right. But we certainly accelerated that, for the benefit of a handful. But more importantly, when we went off the gold standard and caused the cost of living to rise and the cost of production in this country to rise, that caused a lot of the industry to move overseas because it was too expensive to produce over here. And, of course, it raised the cost of living. So on an individual basis, it made it more difficult,
for example,
live.
For example, we shouldn't have the highest tax rate for corporations in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Right? I mean,
That's
that
right.
doesn't help us. Right? I mean, we can't create policies that make it the hardest place to make money in the world if you want to keep companies from moving overseas. It's just not.
At the same time, we have all these tax loopholes that allow all the
Exactly.
companies to keep their cash overseas, or they can have tax havens, tax inversions. Again, this comes down to that lobbying aspect of manipulating the economy for the benefit of a handful. We don't benefit from all that cash that Apple has made because A, they're producing so much in China, and B, they're keeping all their cash in Ireland, and the government is letting them. So the only people that really benefit are people at the top of Apple and the Chinese employees who get to produce.
Yeah. That's because all our policies go on in the tax code. Because we don't make laws anymore. I had Alan Walensky, who was the assistant tax secretary, and he goes, all the rules, everything's going on in our taxes. That's where policy gets made because it's too hard to get things through Congress. So you just create loopholes and different things in the tax code, and that's where things get done.
And I mean, let's face it, lobbyists have taken over the country, and a big reason for that is because the cost of everything has gone up. The cost of running a political campaign has gone up. I remember when Obama's 2008 campaign broke all records until he shattered his own record at the last one. And I don't know, my guess is Hillary Clinton's numbers are going to blow his away simply based on the amount of financial contributions I've seen compared to what he got, which were the highest. And, if anyone, which is ironic because her family, her foundation, they have so much money. But if anyone has benefited from the lobbying or the lobbying side, it's her. I mean, I just saw this list. Literally every trade group in America is at the trough right now, and which is what scares me so much. What scares me about Trump is that he's an unknown, but at least he doesn't have every financial institution and lobbying group on the planet basically setting policy for the nation, which is basically where we are now and where we're going in the future, unless we make a dramatic change.
If we don't clean up the tax code, we don't clean up that, we're hosed.
That's right.
Because that's where everything's
right.
And people don't realize that's where everything's going on.
Unfortunately,
it's all in there.
Yeah. Unfortunately, the only changes we're going to see in the tax code are going to be the ones that send us to outright socialism. And I don't even mean as a policy per what Bernie Sanders wants. I mean, we have Obamacare, for instance, and all these entitlements. And, now I think it's 55 or 60% of the people in America have some entitlement of some kind. And that number is only going to go up as the economy weakens and the demographics, the baby boomers, all that, and the lack of funding for all these entitlements like Social Security and Medicare. So we're going to, probably a lot sooner than people think, have a full-blown socialist tax model, in which case get ready for 50% plus tax rates for the average person just on a federal basis. I mean,
but don't you think we could already be beyond that? Because we pay for our own health care. We pay for a lot of our own services, but yet our taxes are pretty high. So if you compare us to a socialist country that get all those services paid for, we might already be at that level.
Well, yeah, that's the scary part because we don't have those taxes yet on a national level, but because of the increases in our cost of living for things like healthcare, we're almost doing that already. The problem is because of the demographics and because of, those dramatic and rapidly increasing trade deficits and budget deficits, the government is going to need more money. And that's even before considering the fact that you asked if we're in a recession. I think we're in the early stages of a depression. So they're going to have less tax receipts and they're going to need more money. They'll probably spend that money on, wars and, and corporations' tax benefits that, even if they do raise the taxes on us, the corporations will still find loopholes. So the point is,
but they have
to,
right? They have to.
They have to. That's right. Either way, you do the math, we're going to have 50% plus tax rates on average federal. And so And people say, no, that can never happen. What do you mean? That's what Europe is. And then Europe's even worse right now. Look what's going on there. They theoretically would need to raise taxes further and they already have those socialist rates. So it's